Well, what a joy. I'm so thrilled. Erwin, welcome back to Win Today.
I'm so glad to be here with you.
Thank
And
you.
you're in sunny Detroit,
I am. I am.
and
How's
I'm in
LA?
cold Los Angeles.
Is it cold today?
So, for LA, it's chilly. It's like 73. But it is good to be back with you, Christopher.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And hey, we're just going to dive in today. Erwin, as I begin, I just want to get inside your own pursuit of genius. We're talking today about your brand new book, The Genius of Jesus. And just a quick plug, the podcast, The Genius of, I'm already hooked. So it's a brilliant work. But hey, as we dive in, what was the motivation for pursuing genius in your life? How did it play out? We can dive into your story and we'll see where this takes us.
Well, it's interesting to me that my publisher told me that they felt it was the most intimate book I've ever written, which you wouldn't think a book on genius and the genius of Jesus would be a very personal, intimate book. But I realized that so much of my own personal journey is wrapped up in this process. I mean, it's a book that has taken 55 years of my life to come together. I mean, by the time I was 12 years old, I was in a psychiatric chair. I was a straight D student, first through 12th grade. I was always struggling with failing out of every kind of social structure. And they gave me IQ tests when I was 11 years old or so to see if I was mentally challenged or capable. And
Wow.
and so I think that my own personal journey was always a sense of deficit. Like, do I have what it takes to make a difference in this world, to do something meaningful, to have significance? Am I, and I find this kind of hard to explain, but when I was young, I'm talking 9, 10, 11 years old, I would live with an anxiety that there was a thought that I could not hold. That there was an idea, a truth, a maxim that somehow I was incapable of understanding. And some people want to be faster, and some people want to be stronger, and some people want to be taller, and some people want to be better looking. I just wanted to have the capacity for unlimited imagination and thinking. And so maybe a lot of my search for genius was my deep sense of inadequacy.
Wow.
And trying to figure out, is there an element of genius in every human being? Is there something inside of us all that is overlooked and maybe even undeveloped?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's sort of the backdrop of it. And so when I began processing this book, I realized I've spent my whole life studying genius, and I wanted to write a book just on genius. And I've spent my all my adult life in the pursuit of Jesus, and it just became for me a really significant question. How is it possible that Jesus has never made it on a single list of geniuses in the world? That you just don't find him on any list of geniuses. You always find Da Vinci, you always find Picasso, you always find Mozart. Now you always find Einstein. Then it'll expand. You'll find Marie Curie, or you'll find Stephen Hawking, or you'll pick up others along the way. I've even seen lists with Buddha, and lists with Muhammad, and lists with Mandela and Gandhi, which are in many ways political, religious leaders, and yet there's never been a list with Jesus on it. And that really set me on a kind of a personal and philosophical quest, going, does Jesus actually qualify as a genius? Obviously I believe Jesus is God, and so he clearly qualifies as divine, but in just a practical, objective, human assessment, did Jesus express a genius? Can it be identified? And has it been overlooked? And that, for me, is the question I don't think has been asked in 2,000 years. And so I was excited because I felt like I was writing about something that no one had ever written on.
I think you're right about that. I've never read anything like what I read in your book, and it's fascinating because I'd love to drill down inside your story just for a moment. In fact, I finished listening to your interview with Ed Milet last Thursday, and it was so rich. And by the way, guys, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to access the Genius of podcast with Erwin McManus. But anyway, Erwin, I caught this, and I was literally driving, stopped, jotted it down in a note, and I said, wow, this is good. And this goes to what you were saying about growing up. You said what ends up becoming our genius is something that we develop in our struggle to survive. And then you said this, the crisis becomes the incubator. I'm so fascinated by the connection between genius and crisis. Teach us more.
Yeah, this was really a conversation that my wife Kim instigated. She asked me one day, do you feel that humans are capable of anything? And I responded, I think we're capable of anything necessary for survival. That I think probably over 20 years ago when I wrote An Unstoppable Force, I talked about the Baka people who live in the most complex and dangerous ecosystem in the world. And their children, by the age of 10, have a PhD level knowledge of botany because it's necessary for survival. And then when you think about the runners in Ethiopia or Mexico that can run 20, 30 miles a day without, really losing their wind. And you begin realizing that if you have to run a great distance to hunt or to survive because that's the only way you can get food, or if you have to develop certain intellectual or physical competencies, we humans find a way to erase the line of limitation. And and frankly, even when you think about whatever your positions are on the vaccines, the fact that a process that takes years and years somehow was circumvented with a new approach toward engaging viruses and diseases that up to the time of COVID was considered heretical and irresponsible science. And so when suddenly you have a new crisis, it changed the landscape of how science even saw itself. And I think this is true, that human beings have this uncanny capacity to reinvent themselves in the middle of crisis when the crisis demands it. And that's why the dinosaurs are not here, because they couldn't figure out how to survive the Ice Age. But we humans, we seem to be able to survive every crisis. We've survived every crisis we've ever faced up to now.
I'm so fascinated with this, and we'll go down the rabbit hole just for a moment because you and Aaron were talking about this on the Battle Ready podcast. And you made this comment when I was listening to it. I thought, that's actually so true. The episode you guys were talking about fear, and in it, Erwin, you said the science doesn't change. Our understanding of the science changes, and that changes the paradigm by which we approach.
Right.
What would we need to know then about even this subject, about discovering genius, unpacking what's in us, what's intrinsic to us? Is it our understanding of what's inside of us? Is it our openness and development to the Lord? How does that play out?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're connecting the question to what I said about science, that when people say trust the science, really what they mean is trust the scientist. Because there's a gap between the science and the scientist. And the moment there's no gap between the science and the scientist, you move toward a level of narcissism. And it's true even in theology. So I'm at this event this past weekend. All the attenders had to pay $100,000 to be there. They have to run companies that minimally make $100 million a year to qualify to be at this event. And I'm in a conversation with the guy who has the highest recorded IQ in the world, and another guy who's, they're talking about, believe it or not, round Earth or flat Earth. And of course, the guy with the highest IQ in the world is not a flat Earth guy. He actually believes the Earth is spherical. And the other guy's arguing. And suddenly he says, and God revealed this to me. He opened my eyes and I could see that the earth is flat. And that's the meaning of the firmament. And he went on and on. And I was so embarrassed that the guy now is this Christian who believes in flat earth talking to this atheist who's trying to have a conversation with them. And I told him, I said, the moment I said, look, use data, use science, use math, use physics. But the moment you go to divine revelation, that God somehow revealed to you that the earth is flat, there's really nowhere we can have a conversation anymore. Because by the way, that's spiritual narcissism. The moment you cannot distinguish between your ideas and the ideas of God. And the reason I'm going here is because there is a gap between what can be known and what we know. And we have to be really aware of that, because we wouldn't be able to fly into space if our math was off. We would not land on the moon. I mean, one of the ways you can know that we've got at least this part of the math right is that we were able to take off from this planet and land on the moon. We go, oh, the math works. And otherwise, if they were floating off into, space for the next, 50 years, we go, wow, our math was off. But it's the same way with the human spirit. If you don't know what you are, you're not going to land where you think you're going. And we spend most of our life going, I don't know who I am. And I said, look, it's worse than that. You don't even know what you are. And, when I'm searching for my identity, you need to actually be searching for your essence. What does it mean to be created in the image and likeness of God? And if you don't even know what you are, that you're created in the image of God, you're never going to know who you are. And so I feel like there's the same thing of trust the science, and there's a disconnect between, well, I don't know if I trust the scientists, because it's the source that we're actually struggling to trust. And this is why, to me, the scriptures are so important, is that it gives me the source access to know what I am as a human being. And out of knowing what I am, I can begin to know who I am.
Okay. Can you just spend a little more time on essence versus identity? Because I'm just fascinated myself, but I know listeners and viewers are fascinated as well, because we've been in a conversation, let's just say in the last 10 years, and I'm not diminishing the significance of this book, but there was a book that came out, Start With Why, and I believe it's awesome, and the principles are awesome. When you discover your why, then it'll help you discover your how and clarify your how, then of course that goes to what. And I started to think, no, we should be starting with who. Like, if we don't define our identity, if we don't start with who, then our why could be a dysfunctional coping mechanism to compensate for a lack of identity. But you just said essence trumps identity. Can I hear more about that?
Yeah, well, let me go back. And
let's do it.
I love Simon Sinek, and I think his book, Start With Why, is really important. And in fact, if you go back 10 years before his book, To Unstoppable Force, I have an entire section in that book that says Start With Why.
Okay.
And so my first book in 2000 actually gives a process of starting with why. And because organizationally, when you start with what or with how, and you haven't started with the why, you're always going to have a misdirect. But when you're dealing with human beings, if you want to take the question why, you want to take it maybe before us and go, why did God create us? That maybe the starting with why is the problem, is that we start the why with us rather than the why with God. And if the universe is deterministic, if the universe is just mathematical, if the universe is just consequential, that it doesn't have intention, then there is no why. And so ironically, when you come to the belief that there is no God, then you have no principle why. And which means we'll never have a source of identity, because we don't have a source of essence, because we're just the outcome of math. And so I don't want to diminish the why in that, because the why actually can also go back to essence. Why were we created? And that's one of the reasons, like when you're dealing with like people who are strong Calvinists, and I don't even know where your perspective is, but like the backdrop question of Calvinism is the why is the glory of God. And so everything exists for the glory of God. That's the why. And I'm going, well, if the why is the glory of God, he did a terrible job, because the multiplicity of human activities actually diminish the glory of God, or do not reveal or reflect the glory of God. So I'm going, if that was the initial why, the why isn't working. And in fact, you don't have to have free will. to glorify God, because the entire universe that doesn't have the conscious ability to choose glorifies God perfectly.
Wow.
And so then I go, okay, no, the initial why can't be God's glory. It has to be love. Because only love demands free will. And so love demands the risk of rejection. Love demands the risk of actually diminishing your glory. And so then the beauty of the why for me is God's intention for the entire universe is love. And so then it leads you right back to essence. That, for instance, just two sides of this. I'm from El Salvador. So I'm an immigrant, right? From El Salvador. But most people don't realize that and can't identify that because my last name is McManus and my first name is Erwin, so it's German Irish, even though my name is an alias, right? And so they immediately in their minds see someone who's not Spanish, and then I don't speak English with an accent. And so they actually look at my identity through an identification. But they can't see my essence, that I was born in San Salvador, that I spoke Spanish first before I spoke English, and that in my essence I have the characteristics and dynamics of a Latin American and of an immigrant. But on the flip side, my identity isn't in being Spanish or Latin or Hispanic or whatever else somebody says, because my essence is deeper than my ethnicity. It's deeper than my skin color. It's deeper than my migration patterns. And because my essence is really formed out of my understanding of why I'm here, who I am, and what my intention is. And so you can see from both sides, people can confuse your essence by the signals they look for on the outside. Mm-hmm. And that's why when a person's really attractive, I always find it so challenging when a person's like really handsome or really beautiful, because their identity sticks to their appearance and attractiveness so early that they don't really get the opportunity to build their identity in the essence of who they're becoming as a human being. Or when a person is prodigious with talent, in chapter 2 of The Genius of Jesus, I talk about the prodigy. And one of the great challenges when you're a prodigy is that you have such inherent gifting and talent that everyone attaches your identity to that action, to that creative process, and they don't allow you to develop fully. And that's why so many times when you identify people as geniuses, they lack social skills or emotional intelligence, or they lack relational value systems. And it's oftentimes because their identity was actually made so shallow because their talent was so deep. And so you don't develop the essence. Wow. And so your identity is always lost, because what happens when you're the greatest athlete in the world and then your body breaks down? And what happens to your identity then? Yes. What happens when your identity is based on your talent, and then that talent diminishes, and then you realize that you have unraveled your soul and you're empty at the core.
My goodness. wintoday.tv/episode 265, guys. Go get a copy of Erwin's book, The Genius of Jesus. But Erwin, I want to pull a quote actually from the book, because this leads into right what we were talking about. You said, we search for what we lack and we long for what we fear we don't possess. And it seems like the fear of insignificance is at the doorstep of a lot of people's heart. I mean, that's totally been my story. Teach that out for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. 2 days ago, I was at dinner, and a man sat next to me who has the highest recorded IQ in the world, and he's the individual that the TV show Scorpion was built out of. Wow. And he sat down next to me, and then he said, "Everyone says that the conversation between us is inevitable." And we began having this conversation, and he goes, I disagree with half of everything you're saying. And, and he goes, I just disagree with, just based on the facts. And we began having this great conversation, which I enjoyed so much. In fact, I was sad that it was interrupted by another person who wanted to talk. Because, you see, whenever you're rooted in what can be known, all the facts are in your favor. Whenever you're creating the future, the facts are against you. And so I don't expect the facts to be for me. I actually expect the facts to be against me, because all of my life, the ideas I've thrown out into the world didn't have the facts behind them because they were pushing us to the future, not to the past. And what he was actually talking about was genius. When 20 years ago, when I said that all human beings are creative, I was called a heretic. When I said that the future actually comes out of the choices humans make, I was also called a heretic. Now those things are actually more common language. And the idea that every person is creative is more normative now. Mm-hmm. When I said, you're both a work of art and an artist at work, that every human being is an artist, that was considered heretical. Now it's used on slogans for Adidas. Mm-hmm. And what you end up realizing is that whenever you're stepping into a new understanding of who we are as human beings, the facts aren't going to be for you. And what we were arguing about was genius. That he said that, the facts are against me. He's right. 98% of adults fail any test that identifies genius. So the facts are against me. The facts seem to show that only 2% of humans carry any level of genius within them. So the fact that I would actually say that there's inherent genius inside of every human being, I understand. I'm going against the facts. But I am actually going for the future. See, because I'm convinced that children have that inherent genius in them, and that genius is actually parented out of them, it's educated out of them, it's adulted out of them. That as we move toward maturity and adulthood, we accidentally actually begin to diminish the uniqueness in people so that they fit more comfortably in society. And I think that longing that human beings have, that there's more in them than they know, that there's more in them than they're able to access, I actually think that's the inherent genius within you, longing to be actualized. But it takes less work to become the average version of yourself. It takes everything you have to become the most extraordinary version of yourself. And so I think there's this dynamic in just the pursuit of genius where I want to fight for this idea that there is latent genius inside of every human being, and a part of our stewardship is to nurture that genius and watch it develop and grow. But I also think there's this other aspect of it, which leads us to the genius of Jesus. Mm-hmm. The problem with genius is that it's not transferable. I mean, I wish it was, right? But you could spend your life with Mozart and you're never going to become a composer, or you spend your life with Picasso, you're never going to become a painter, or your life with Steph Curry, you're probably never going to be draining three-pointers, and or spend your life with Bobby Fischer and may never become a master chess player. Genius simply is not transferable. Mm-hmm. And so then what's the point of studying genius other than simply to admire it? And I think this is the unique aspect of the genius of Jesus. Jesus's genius is the singular genius that is transferable. And that when you actually engage in a relationship with Jesus Christ, his genius is actualized within you, and you have access to that genius, and it actually changes the essence of who you are as a human being. And that's the argument of this book, is that the genius of Jesus is transferable, it's accessible, and it can become not just something you have, but something you become, something you are.
And I admire that so much, because I think what I love best is the quote from your book is, you describe the genius of Jesus as contagious. I love that, because when you were talking about Picasso and Michael Jordan, genius not being transferable in the sake of what you just talked about, you said the genius of Jesus is contagious. Erwin, why? Does it poke at the childlike wonder? Because we read scripture, unless you become like a little child, you by no means shall enter the kingdom of heaven. Does this contagious aspect of Jesus' genius poke at our essence then? I'm just trying to thread this together and say, oh, could it be that the contagious nature of the genius of Jesus says, I'm calling to the deepest part of who you are. I'm speaking to, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. I knit you together. I'm speaking to that essence. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's because Jesus actually restores to us that which our souls long for to be fully human. Mm-hmm. And that at the core of our longing is to become something that which should seem so easy. Shouldn't it be easy for humans to be human? Mm-hmm. And yet we're not even capable of being fully humane. And what Jesus does is restores to us our humanity. And at this event that I was at with all these guys, mostly men, that whose businesses are 100 million or above, I can't even fathom paying $100,000 to be at an event. Yeah. And in fact, I met one guy who said, I paid my $100,000. I came in, it wasn't really for me, so I was going to fly out. I'm going, man, if I pay $100,000, I'm staying the whole time. I'm going to milk it for everything I can get. But the money just wasn't that important to him. And one of the things that has really struck me was that the dumbest decisions we will ever make will not cost us money. It will cost us people. And what I'm in this room full of people who are trying to figure out how to make smarter decisions to make more money, because 100 million isn't enough, and $500 million is enough, and $1 billion isn't enough, and $3 billion is enough. There's like this drive to always figure out how to make more. And I told him, I said, because I talked to him about the genius of Jesus, I said, look, if there's one fundamental thing that Jesus' genius will help you is it will help you not die alone. And because you can have all the wealth and success and power and fame in the world, and without the intelligence of love, you're going to die alone. And I do argue in the book that I'm convinced empathy is the highest form of intelligence. Mm-hmm. And that one of the problems with the Enlightenment is that we made academics the proof of intelligence, that information becomes the proof of intelligence. And so we measure IQs and we measure how much knowledge you can store in your brain, the complexity of ideas you can hold in your brain, rather than the complexity of human relationships you can actually make healthier, make better, make more beautiful. And I think it takes a far more complex intelligence to make people in your life healthier and better and more whole than it does to make more money or to be better at math. And you will not spend your life searching for math, but you will spend your life searching for love.
I'm so glad you took us there. Anything else you want to say about empathy? Because this podcast, Erwin, is all about mental and emotional health and spiritual growth. And as I was thinking about today's conversation with you, I was thinking about an underdeveloped aspect of our culture, of our society, that being empathy. I think one of the quotes I wrote down from you was that our battle is always for people, not against people. So I guess in this conversation about unlocking genius, how do we move toward being more empathetic? And then what will that do inside the framework of our relationships? I love that you took us there.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, when you think about things like mental health, which I've written and talked a lot about over the years, is that, the reason we struggle with mental health is that we don't even know how to do the basic work of knowing how to be human. Think about it. There is no other species that's in therapy. And the reason we're in therapy is because we don't know how to be human. It doesn't even come naturally to us anymore. And so we need to realize that somewhere along the way, we began living beneath our humanity. And what's odd to me, and even when you're dealing with emotional well-being, strangely, has less to do with how much damage has been inflicted on you, and more to do with how much damage you end up choosing to inflict on others because of the damage that's been inflicted on you.
Yeah.
Now, let me just kind of break that down
Please.
A little bit, or even damage you do to yourself. I've known people who have experienced horrific trauma in their life and have never recovered. And it's really difficult, and you can understand it and empathize. I've also known people who have experienced the same level of trauma, even more, and yet somehow decided to use that trauma to serve others and to make the world a better place. And the ability to absorb that trauma and to use the momentum of that trauma to actually make the world a better place appears to be the singular way of healing from that trauma. And
Yeah.
and it's tough because how do you tell a person who's so traumatized and so broken the way to healing is by healing other people? Because what you want to do is you want to say, no, I'm in this much pain, you need to take care of me. But as long as you're only focused on your own pain, you're a closed system, and so you're never going to get better. Because when you're a closed system, whatever's in there stays in. So when you're a closed system, your pain stays in, your bitterness stays in, your wounding stays in, your fear stays in. And when you open up your system and you begin to love and you begin to care for other people, you begin to live a life of compassion, when you begin to live a life of service, strangely enough, you become an open system, which allows all that toxic past and experience to actually come out of your soul in a positive way. Wow. And so one of the things I work so hard trying to convince people is, hey, I'm not trying to discount how much pain you've been through. I'm not trying to discount what you are going through. What I'm trying to tell you is that you can't get better when your soul's a closed system. The only way you get better is when you call the good out of your soul so that you can actually do good toward others. And because it like a lot of us, we want the healing to come from the outside in, right?
Yes.
So I'm broken, I'm in pain, I'm angry, I'm bitter, I'm afraid, I'm traumatized. And so we want healing to come from the outside in, but actually the only way the deepest wounds get healed is if we can call out the good from the inside out, from the deepest part of us. And so we have to call out forgiveness, and we have to call out compassion, we have to call out kindness, and we have to, one of the hardest things in the world is to convince someone who's been really hurt that they need to stop being mean. That their pain isn't the justification for their unkindness, that they need to call out kindness because it'll heal them from the inside out. And so my life experience shows me that the deepest healing comes not when something comes from the outside in, but when we call something out from the inside out.
That's so good, which leads me to this, and I love this from the book, Erwin, you wrote, you're never trapped in a moment. Every moment is a passageway into your future if you will take it. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, no, it's for me one of the most powerful things I used to have on the wall. The most spiritual activity you will ever engage in is to choose. And that every day the most spiritual thing you do is choose. And some people say, no, the most spiritual thing in the world is to pray, or the most spiritual thing is to read the Bible, or the most spiritual thing is to meditate, or the most spiritual thing is to worship. But before you worship, before you pray, before you read the Bible, before you go to church, before you do anything spiritual, you have to choose. So the unifying act of anything that's profoundly spiritual or profoundly healing is the choice to do it. So actually, the most spiritual thing a human being ever does is to choose. And so inside of every moment, there are an endless number of choices that can be made. And it's the choosing that activates the momentum in that moment. Wow. And what happens so oftentimes when we're paralyzed, we don't choose. We don't choose bad, we just don't choose good. We don't choose forward, we just don't choose backwards. And so what ends up happening is we end up moving into a paralysis, and so life happens to us rather than us making life happen. And which is when we become paralyzed, when we become passive, and when we become a victim to the world around us, because life is literally coming at us rather than us coming at life. And so I just try to remind people, look, the first thing you got to do is choose. And no one else can choose for you. In fact, when people are choosing for you, you're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And then when you don't choose, you're eliminating the choices that can be made. And so you are limiting the power of your freedom. Yeah. And by the way, when you talk about the good that has to come within, this is why, for me, who Jesus is so critical. Because the deepest recesses of our soul that are so damaged and broken, and maybe even so dark, and we can't seem to get to them ourselves and fix them ourselves. And this is why opening up your life to Jesus to me is so significant, because when you invite Jesus into your life, the creator of the universe, the God who knows you inside and out, now dwells within you, and his presence is at the very deepest part of who you are. And now you have access to his good and his beauty and his hope and his love. And all of a sudden now you have a wellspring of essence that you can pull from, not from the outside in, but from the inside out.
And I think that's transformation, right? Because we live in such a culture inundated with self-help, self-healing, speak your truth, all this. And I think what you just described is the process of transformation from the inside out, and that'll beat self-help 11 times out of 10, right?
Yeah, I'm all for self-help, self-development.
Sure, of course.
I just think that we need to realize it has its limitations.
Yes.
And, because there's so many personal disciplines that we should be paying attention to. A lot of people in the self-help world have just paid attention to obvious practical wisdom. And they go, look, whatever, get up early, or, establish a routine, or, get to work, or make good choices, or, and they kind of give you some things that basically healthy people kind of almost do naturally. And then self-development to me is a little more nuanced than that. Different than self-help, self-development gives you processes that you may be unaware of that get you where you want to go. And so I'm really fascinated by processes that help me get to where I want to go. And, if you just look at maybe like weight loss, right? Sure. Maybe everybody wants to lose some weight along the way. And then 50 different people will give you a different process of how to get there. And really understanding the process that works best for you is a part of our growing as a human being. But the problem is we can't change the core of who we are. Only Jesus can change the core of who we are.
Yes.
And so the essential problem is a heart problem. It's a core problem. It's an essence problem. And so whenever you're trying to fix everything except for the essence, the solution is only temporary. But when you let Jesus come and transform your essence, now all the other stuff can actually have long-term benefit for your life, which I think is really exciting.
Erwin, in the book, you said that genius leaves clues. How so?
By the way, I actually really love that line in the book, because
I do too.
And I think that what you find so oftentimes are the things that everyone else tried to stop you from doing when you were a child were some of the clues of your own personal genius. And, I look back in my life. I had 2 younger sisters, and I would be asked to I would put them to bed at night. And most people in the world, I imagine, who read stories or, at bedtime, they get a book and they read a story to their kids. Every night when I would put my little sisters to bed, when it was my turn, whenever I did it, I would create stories from scratch. I would create narratives, I would create universes, I would create different worlds, different realities, and I would create entire stories as I put them to bed. And before I was in junior high, I was writing short stories and my own versions of novels, and then burying them or destroying them later as an artistic act of nihilism. I wrote the story, but no one will ever read it, and I look back on my life, and there was a foreshadowing that what I longed to do is write, and to tell stories that opened up people's imaginations, opened up their souls, and made the world a better place. And so I look back on my life and I realized that if there's any form of genius in me as a writer, that there were clues in my life when I was really, really young. Rather than wanting to read the stories that have already been written, I wanted to write the stories that had never been written. And I think that it's true across the board. When Mariah was, I don't even think she was 2 years old. We were sitting with our daughter and we're changing channels, and all of a sudden an orchestra came on and Kim changed the channel again. And Mariah instantly began singing in perfect pitch what she heard the orchestra play just a second before. And I said, Kim, go back, go back. And her genius, her musical genius, left us a clue right away. And she wrote her first song probably before she was in first grade. She wrote a song when she was 14 that ended up being played for 4 minutes and 11 seconds on Grey's Anatomy. And if we hadn't paid attention to the clues, we might have missed her genius. And and I think it's true for everyone along the way.
Yeah.
I think just so many times when you do something, when your kid's coloring out of the box, instead of like paying attention to what they're coloring, we try to get them to color in the box. Well, out of 100 people, pretty much 100 of them can color in the box. And so why in the world are we trying to get our kids to color in the box?
Yeah.
And why aren't we just letting them create and going, okay, there's something really interesting happening here. Mm-hmm. I had a friend years ago whose dad came home and he had drawn with permanent colors on the wall of their house in the living room. And when his dad got home, instead of spanking him, he got him more colors and just let him paint on all the walls. And he became an artist and an architect because his dad just sort of celebrated the craziness of his son's uniqueness and artistry. And I just think that if we pay attention, genius does leave clues, and hopefully someone who loves you will see the clues. But if they don't, you need to take some time and look for the clues that are there in your own life.
That's so good. Well, I think one of the things that heightens genius is focus, and I love the chapter in the book about the genius of focus. And Jesus expressed a prodigious bent early in life. While everyone else was doing the ordinary things, a child at Erwin, he found his focus. So let's talk about the genius of focus, and then really how do we glean from that and develop focus in a distracted, noisy world such as ours?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was in my 20s, I was a part of this group, and they were kind of considered young world leaders, and without my knowledge, they did this intervention. And unfortunately, I was the object of the intervention. And they told me that 2 things in my life would keep me from achieving my greatest potential. Okay. One of them was my lack of focus. And the second one was that I kept investing in people that they called wannabes. And I remember processing with them, and I said, I think the difference is that you see people as wannabes, I see them as gonna-bes. And so I'm going to push back on this a little bit because some people I think are designed to work with people who are already refined, and I have nothing wrong with that. That's Phil Jackson working with the best.
Wow.
And he wasn't really good at developing rookies. And then there's other coaches like Pop who are able to take people that no one sees their potential and pull out their greatness. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I think on that spectrum, I just like working with people who are raw material. Wow. And but the other part was focus, and so I actually had to step back and go, am I too distracted? Do I have too many things I look at? Because I'm a person who likes a lot of things. And I'm passionate about a lot of things. And people say, do what you're passionate about. I have a lot of passion. My passion just touches so many spectrums, and do what you're interested in. And I don't have a particular talent that overshadows all my other things I do. So I have, several things that I could do that still I could do as my life and my livelihood. And so we went to this neuro clinic, and ironically, I had one of the highest rates on focus they'd ever seen. And so I went, okay, hold on a minute. How did I go from a guy where I'm being reprimanded for having no focus to now having this neurological assessment telling me I have hyper focus? And I realized that what other people thought was lack of focus was lack of interest. That a lot of times people don't have focus because they haven't found what they actually care about. They're just not interested. Mm-hmm. And so when you put me in a room full of stuff, of things I'm not interested in, I have no focus. And it's like, hello, Erwin, are you there? Mm-hmm. And the moment I actually care deeply about something, it's like something locks in my brain and I'm locked in. And I become hyper-focused. And so what I would say with what happens with prodigies is that they find what they love so early that they have hyper-focus. and other things just don't distract them. And so other 12-year-olds may want to go outside and play. Like a lot of people go, well, yeah, but that parent abused their kid. They didn't give them a childhood. And they go, no. That kid locked in so early. All those other things didn't bring them joy.
Yeah.
They didn't bring them pleasure. They didn't want to do all those other things. They wanted to do this one thing all the time. In fact, I have a friend in Australia whose daughter had severe attention deficit disorder. And severe obsessive compulsive disorder. And because of her hyperactivity, they were going crazy as parents. And one day they brought home, I think it was a cello or a violin. I can't remember. I think it was a violin. And they said they just didn't know what to do with her. And they gave her a violin lesson, and she became hyper focused, and she's like a world-renowned artist now. Yeah. And she travels the world playing her violin. And it was all of that ADD, ADHD, and all that OCD, and all of that hyperactivity suddenly focused around something that captured her attention, her soul, her passion, her interest completely, and then she became the best in the world. And what I would say to people is, you're less in danger of focusing on too many things, than you are of not caring deeply about one thing. Mm-hmm. Like, what is it that you care about so much that you're able to push out all the other distractions in life? And so writing a book, let me tell you, you know what the hardest part of the process is to start writing, right?
Stephen Pressfield, The Resistance.
Yeah, it's like, you know, like when I have to begin, I am in misery. I mean, it's just horrible for me. Everything distracts me. Everything is a problem. Mm-hmm. And I just can't get there. It's like I have to work really hard to get into that hyper focus. And then when I get into the hyper focus, I want to destroy anything that gets in my way. And my family, I've gotten better. You know, I think they would attest to this. But when I first started writing books, they're like, oh no, like you're in writing mode, because it agitated me to hear their voice. Wow. It irritated me that they decided to walk into the room I was in. You know, my wife would make the mistake of asking me if I was hungry. I mean, like, how dare you interrupt me and ask me if I'm hungry? And I didn't realize it, but it was almost as if my skin was sensitive to any outside intervention or interruption, because I was so focused on getting this done. And so I wrote The Barbarian Way in 10 hours. Because I was so hyper-focused that the book just came out so fast that I couldn't even stop. And I think that focus for me is more the outcome of intention and passion. That you go, this is what I must do, and this is what I love to do. And so it becomes something not that you have to do, or not something you even get to do, but something you must do.
It's sort of the connection between focus and discipline then, because the last time you were on the podcast, one of my favorite parts of that conversation was you and I were talking about the difference between discipline and structure. And you were telling me how you may not consider yourself totally structured, but you are unbelievably disciplined. And it may be, hey, I'm going to write at 10 p.m. or whatever, and you're going to just hone in on that. Any other thoughts on discipline versus structure connected to focus? Because that's liberating for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, I definitely am not a structured person. Wouldn't that be true, Lisa? And I have someone sitting here in the room who's been with me forever. And I understand structures are necessary. I'm not against structures. I'm for all the structures people need, but I'm not going to create structure, really. And I find structure to be so limiting for me. And one of the challenges when I became a follower of Christ was that all discipleship was about structure, not discipline. It was about having your quiet time at the exact same time. It's about having an hour where you're doing this. It's about, you know, in fact, I was at the Global Leadership Summit years and years ago, and Bill Hybels did a talk before I spoke on every great speaker does this. And in his talk, he was like, every great speaker prepares at the same time. They prepare at the same place. He went through like all this list of, 9 things. Wow. 8 of those things I never do. And so I got up there after he did, and I said, it's crazy that, I get invited to speak here because I fail the task of a great speaker, because I don't do a single thing that you describe great speakers doing.
Yeah.
And I think part of the challenge is that we think that structure is the same as discipline. And in fact, when you're doing like physical exercise, if you have the exact same structure every day, you will not get healthier. You will not get stronger. You will not actually optimize your physical capacity, because your body learns to predict what you're doing. And when you do the same thing every day, it doesn't have the same effect. The best kind of workouts are the ones that are a bit unpredictable, because your body doesn't know what you're going to do. Your body is surprised. It has to react. There has to be a level of mystery and uncertainty. And so ironically, the best approach is for your body. And that's why if you have a trainer, if you ever go to like one of those gyms where different people are training, they're always changing up the workouts so that your body is actually surprised, because the structure diminishes output, but the discipline increases it. And so I would say to people, so oftentimes it's structure that's limiting you. And when you drive to work and drive home, take a different street. Try driving different ways. Don't eat the same thing every day. Try different restaurants. Try foods you've never tried before. Do some things with your left hand that you used to do with your right hand. Find some ways to create unpredictability in your life, some level of uncertainty, some level of mystery, and you'll actually begin to increase even your intellectual capacity. The more predictable our lives are, the less our brains have to be interesting. And the more unpredictable our lives are, the more our brains have to work harder and expand. That's why travel is so helpful. When you travel to new places, around new people, with new languages, with different cultures, your brain actually expands. You actually grow in your imagination. You grow in your experience. So you grow in the depth of who you are as a human being. You actually get smarter. And so I think discipline is important, but it's far more important than structure. And we should not mistake structure as discipline.
That's so good. Erwin, what's one of the best decisions you've made in the last year?
Oh, wow. One of the best decisions I've made in the last year?
Yeah, 6 months even. Yeah.
That's I don't want to pick like outcome goals, but
Sure.
I'm trying to think. Man, because this last year was COVID, was quarantine, was the Black Lives Matters. There was so many different things we were facing during the whole pandemic, and but you know what? I'm gonna just say one of the best decisions I made in the past year was to start my fashion company with my son,
That's awesome.
Aaron.
Yeah.
And we started in December during quarantine. We felt like people were so depressed and people were giving up on the future, and we wanted to do something that said, no, it's time to create, it's time to risk, it's time to invent. And going back and designing clothes and using that as a space for my imagination and creativity and artistry. I actually think it's been a great decision. It's been a huge risk. It's cost me an immense amount of money. I've gotten a lot of criticism because people don't think pastors should do anything except, I guess, preach or something. But it has for me been so life-giving. And then right behind that, I wrote a graphic novel.
Wow.
And it's in the hands of an artist right now in South America. And I think one of the best decisions I made was to finally write and finish that graphic novel that I've wanted to do for so long. So those are two things.
Good for you. This has been such an enlivening conversation for me, Erwin, and here's where I'd love to land, because I know this has been the story of your life experience in the last few years. Cancer and anxiety both arrived in your life within the last few years, and in that season, I pulled this quote that I found in research for today. You said, "I had this overwhelming sense that I'd lived this life that mattered, and in that sense, when they're telling me I have cancer, it sounds like you're hearing you're going to die. But the truth is, we're all going to die. We just don't know when, and we don't know where." So the question is not, are you going to die? The question is, are you ever going to live? And so if the answer is yes, we're going to have a way better shot at living out our unique genius, right?
Yeah, I want to be so clear. I had cancer and I've had anxiety, but they were not together. I never had anxiety over having cancer. And
Okay,
for
I didn't
whatever,
know that.
yeah, for whatever reason, I never felt afraid when I had cancer, even when they
Wow.
told me how bad it
Wow.
was, and when I had 6 hours of surgery, and I never had 1 second where I had a lack of peace, or I actually felt like, wow, I've lived a really good life. I would like to live longer, but I felt like I lived a life worth living, and so in that sense, I felt like it would be a good death. And but anxiety for me has been a real issue over the years, and this is where I think it's so interesting. All my anxiety is relational, and I never have anxiety about. I mean, I've lost millions in my life, in business endeavors. I've made millions. I mean, I've never had anxiety about business. I've never had anxiety about, whether my fashion company is going to make it or not. I don't have anxiety about whether the book will sell, millions or not. I don't have anxiety even about Mosaic. I don't have anxiety about whether the church will grow or not. Those things never give me anxiety. All my anxiety is about relationships. Is my relationship with my wife Kim healthy? Are my kids okay? Is Aaron doing well? Is Mariah and Jake doing well? Is now their baby, is Juno
Yeah.
doing well? It's
Yeah.
like I get it. All my anxiety is relational, and I realized that a part of it for me is I'm highly empathetic, so I feel what people are going through incredibly deeply, and there's a part of me that has to learn how to let go of that as much as I can.
Wow.
And I do think that during COVID and during the quarantine, I watched a lot of people I loved and care for so deeply really get traumatized during COVID. I watched them move to a depression. I watched people move to different levels of isolation, disconnection. I watched people struggle with their sense of meaning. And for me, that became overwhelming at times. And so ironically, I guess the big things like life and death, I think I got those, and I've been, but are the people in your life doing well? Those are the things. Those are the places I feel like I feel most anxious in life, and I actually think that interpersonal relationships are the most emotionally consuming aspects of the human experience.
You guys go to the show notes right now at wintoday.tv. Get a copy of Erwin's brand new book, The Genius of Jesus. It's available right now. Erwin, as we land this plane, I'd love to know, what are you reading these days? I think you're one of my favorite thought leaders, and it's why I love to ask those questions.
Yeah, I'm just going to confess, I don't read a lot right now.
Okay.
And my son is reading Dune, and he's now in the second edition of it. And he has my love for science fiction. And
Cool.
So my wife and my son are probably the two biggest readers in our family right now. I spend whatever discretionary time I have writing and creating.
It's good.
And in fact, both my kids harass me a lot now, going, "Hey, you used to be a huge reader. You need to be reading again."
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what I do well, and I'll tell you what I don't do well. So people are always asking me, "What are you reading right now?" And I just came back from TED. And so I have that system of thinkers that give input, and I love listening to the great thinkers in the world. And so I get the privilege of being in the room a lot of times with some of the greatest thinkers in the world in every aspect, every domain and discipline. And I feel like that's more where I'm informed now. So I get to be at the place in my life where I don't necessarily have to read the book. I get to talk to the author.
It's even better.
And so I'm in a primary source time of my life, and I'm really grateful for that.
I love it.
Yeah, but I think books are phenomenal. They change people's lives. I believe in them. I write them, and I hope this one impacts millions of people.
I do too. I trust it will. Erwin, thank you for this conversation today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners? Just want to make sure you have a platform to share your heart in this space, and I'm ever grateful.
Yeah, I think one of the uniquenesses of The Genius of Jesus is that if you're a person of faith, it'll, I think, give you a fresh, new perspective on Jesus that up to now hasn't really existed in the Christian faith.
Yes.
And if you have friends that don't believe in Jesus, or if you're a person who doesn't believe in God, I think this is a different frequency of the conversation about God and about who Jesus is that a person without God would really resonate with. When I wrote the book in the first draft, I wrote the book from the position that I did not believe. And because I wanted to write the book from this perspective. Either Jesus changed my life because he is God, or he changed my life because he was the greatest idea that has ever been had. And so somehow an idea changed my life if Jesus isn't God, which I thought, this is pretty amazing that an idea could change me. The one thing I can't deny is that I've been changed by Jesus. The question I could ask am I changed because Jesus is God, or am I changed because Jesus is an idea? And I thought, wow, if he's only an idea, this is the greatest idea that any human being has ever shared with the world. And now, obviously, I believe Jesus is God. But I only went back and wrote that into the book afterwards when the publisher said, hey, could you let people know what you really believe so that Christians don't feel like you're a heretic? Which, I wish I could write this book in such a way where Christians would know, hey, he's having this conversation in such a way so that people without God could actually be brought into it in a really beautiful way. Wow. But a lot of times those of us who are faith are very linear and concrete in our approach. Yeah. So I try to write this book with both streams really respected, where if you do believe, Jesus is really honored, and if you don't believe, Jesus is really, I think, a point of enlightenment. And so I'm really proud of this book. I'm terrified to write about Jesus. The reason I never wrote about Jesus was because there's a book about Jesus. It's called the Bible. And I thought, man, I don't want to write a book that tries to measure itself against the Bible, because I can't do what God did. And but I do think in this moment in history, there's such a desperate need to see Jesus in a new, fresh, and beautiful way. And I'm hoping that this book will be a gift to the world.
I do too. Erwin, how can people stay connected to you? I'm going to put links in the show notes to the podcasts and all that.
Sure. I'd say Aaron and I and my son, we have a podcast called Battle Ready. A lot of fun, a lot of cultural issues.
I love it.
And very controversial. I have a new podcast called The Genius Of, where I'm interviewing different people who have expressed a different aspect of genius. We also have like Mosaic. You can come and join us at Mosaic through the Mosaic app and join us every Sunday. And if you're in LA, I'm going to be doing a book signing at the Barnes & Noble at the Grove on September 14th. So if anyone wants to come out there.
Good.
And we're going to be doing lots of giveaways, by the way. We created these cats for the Genius of Jesus. I've never done this before, but right now I'm just going to do anything I can to convince people to read this book, because I think it's going to have a huge impact. So just follow us and get involved. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Erwin, thank you. I'm just so blessed by this conversation, and you really inspire me. So I'm very grateful for your time today.
Hey, thank you so much. God bless you, Christopher.
Thank you.